They called it a quiet morning. A satellite fell like a tired bird. It did not explode. It came down slow, a pale pin in the blue. No one said warning. Above Earth, a fleet moved with calm efficiency. Plates of metal drifted like islands. Lights in neat rows. Commanders spoke in cool, exact voices. They had plans and maps. Their maps did not include old mirrors or stubborn hands. On the coast, a fisherman looked up. He had a small boat and an old radio. He had seen strange lights for nights. He had salt on his skin. On a hill, an old woman polished a telescope mirror. The mirror was chipped and loved. She kept it for memory. She did not know the word empire. She only knew the sky could surprise. In high orbit, a beam slid from a plate. It was a clean line on a screen. People in smooth uniforms chose a city like a chess piece. The beam reached down like a finger. It hit the city. Glass ran like water. Machines burned. People screamed. A child pressed her face to a window and watched the sky split. The beam should have ended the job. A small mirror, turned by a child's careless game, caught a sliver of light. The mirror had always been for small things, signaling, fixing sails, brightening lamps. It tilted. The beam broke into shards. It bent away. Parts of the city burned, but many were saved. Above, commanders saw data that did not fit. Their maps showed an error. They expected a fix. They did not expect a laugh. Ahmed tuned his radio in a ruined building. He knew wires. He listened to static and found a rhythm. The aliens spoke like drums. Ahmed did not know their words, but he made a reply shaped like an old song and sent it. The fisherman found a probe near his boat. It was small, strange, with glass that glowed. He touched cold metal and called the woman with the mirror. She read the blinking like a poem. Ahmed tapped keys and sent curious sounds. The probe blinked and wrote a thin record. People in basements and kitchens began to try small things. A teacher taught children to make odd beats with pots. A mechanic bent dish parts into antennas. A choir sang on a phone, their song drifted into a probe and made it pause. These acts were not weapons on a map. They were ordinary sounds and tools. The probes expected order. They loved clear answers. They did not expect songs that warmed like fire or rhythms that broke time. Humans gave messy noise. A file moved across the Empire's networks. It was typed with calm hands. The note was simple, unpredictable. Salvage. It was a question. The note landed on desks where people who rarely feared anything read it and felt a chill. News feeds filled with burning images. Fear moved fast. So did a different thing, neighbors formed networks. They shared radio parts, recipes for noise, and stories that fit like patches. Their plan was many small voices, not one command. At night, the village by the sea gathered under lamps. The old woman set the mirror near the probe. Ahmed sent a signal that mixed static with a folk rhythm. The fisherman kept watch on the dark water. The probe blinked as if listening. It gave a thin reply, the phrase again in a neutral voice, unpredictable. Salvage. They did not know how much the Empire had noticed. They did not know how maps could change. All they knew was that a small thing had done a small impossible thing. A mirror bent a beam. A song stalled a machine. A note in a log had become a question with feeling. Someone on a plate would mark the event as a mistake. Mistakes teach. The village learned to hide signals in laughter and to bend light with simple glass. They learned to feed machines the chaos they did not expect. The first mistake was not in underestimating strength. It was in underestimating the everyday. The Empire planned for armies and factories. It had not planned for hands that repair, songs that scatter, or the stubborn tilt of an old mirror. When the night closed, the village kept watch. Radios hummed. A child's rhythm tapped on a tin can. The old woman looked at the probe and then at the sky. Her face was calm. She had watched stars a long time. Somewhere above, the plates hummed and sent new orders. The file read the note again. Unpredictable. Salvage. It was no longer a neat line on a screen. It was a crack in a plan. Earth had made its first quiet move. The story had begun. They had no navy. They had no uniform fleet. They had hands and noise and a grave hunger to keep living. When the empire tightened its sky, cities learned to move like foxes. Streets changed at dusk. Markets closed early. People carried radios in backpacks and parts of old dishes in their pockets. They called themselves many names. Outside the cities, they called themselves neighbors. Ahmed became a node. He worked in the dark like a clockmaker. His fingers knew wire and tired metal. He took broken satellite dishes and cut them down. He bent them into curves that could listen. He taught men who had never seen a lab how to read the small white blips on a screen. The blips were not music. They were pattern and habit and hunger. The fisherman learned to carry a probe in his net. He kept it hidden under rope and salt. He learned the probe's small language. When it blinked in a certain way, he sang a tune. The tune made the probe hesitate, as if thinking. The fisherman did not know how to write code. He only knew songs that parents hummed to babies. The old woman found a new use for her mirror. She polished edges and wired it to a lamp. When the light caught metal in a certain way, it made a sharp pulse. That pulse could scramble a simple sight. It was crude. It was enough. They called their effort the lattice because it was many points linked by thin things, old radios, patched antennas, a web of habit and trust. The lattice had no leader, only men and women who agreed to share a signal and share silence. They traded songs and instructions. They taught children to clap in patterns that did not match any machine's clock. Their first big job was a theft. A relay sat on a hill outside the city. It fed the Empire commands and fed back the eyes of plates in orbit. The relay was protected by machines and by maps that told the Empire where to look. Humans had no maps, but they had feet, and feet can find places maps miss. A small team walked in at night. They had rope and old army boots and a hunger that tasted like cold bread. A boy called Sammy carried a thin coil of wire. A woman named Lila kept a small lamp in her bag. Ahmed walked last, carrying a patched radio like a sleeping animal. They climbed the hill. The relay was tall and white under the moon. A drone circled like a careful bird. The team moved like breath against the wind. Sammy slipped and cursed under his breath. He did not cry. No one did. The relay was not just steel. It was a mind that expected clean numbers. It liked to answer logic with logic. The team fed it chaos. Sammy tied the coil and Lila sang. The song was loud and wrong. It was a market chant and a lullaby mixed together. The relay blinked and scanned. It tried to fit the sound into a file. It failed. The relay systems pulsed. A small hatch opened. Inside, a thin drive sat like a small moon. Ahmed did not take the drive. He held a small tool and pushed a wire. The relay stuttered. A light went out. The team planted a little box that would speak in the relay's own voice but with wrong words. The box spoke in rhythms and sighs. It would confuse the Empire for minutes, then hours. It would send back signals that looked right but felt wrong. They left before dawn. The city slept and the relay sang wrong songs to the sky. The Empire noticed. It redirected a hunter ship. It sent a probe that tasted the air and spat back if it found the right numbers. The hunter circled like a question. A small loss came with the win. Sammy stayed when the ladder broke. He fell and hit stone. He breathed like a bell gone hollow. The team left him wrapped in a blanket. They thought he would live. They did not know the full cost. Sammy's breath was slow for a day. He learned to laugh again with one side of his face. They did not call it a hero's fall. They called it a needed silence. The relay's wrong voice worked. For a time, plates in orbit fed on lies and sent empty responses. Machines faltered. The Empire's chain stumbled like a long animal stepping off a cliff. The Empire did not simply stare. It adapted. It sent a probe that could learn. It had a shape like a beetle and 1,000 eyes. It could watch how rhythms failed and then copy them. Ahmed watched the beetle land near a field. It walked slow and precise. It listened to a farmer beating a drum and learned a pattern. The pattern reached the Empire like a child's letter. The Empire wrote back. The writing was not in words. It was in shifts of light and metal. The lattice changed tactics. They did not only craft noise now. They learned to hide noise in meaning. A teacher's lesson on the radio would hide a pulse. A lullaby would carry a code. Markets would sell patched dishes and secret signals. They learned to make their ordinary life into a veil. Small victories grew a shape. A town's lights blinked and an orbital map showed a gap. A supply drop missed its mark. A command ship lost its course for a day. The Empire lost money and pride. The Empire sent a warning in its cold voice. It would punish if it could. Then the lattice received a message. It came through a patched relay and through radios held like cups. The message was plain and old. It was Morse. The dots and dashes felt like a letter from another age. The code spelled the name of Earth. The message read, "To Earth do you hear?" Then silence. No one knew who sent it. No one knew why it used an old human code. The lattice stared at the blinking light as if at an old friend. Ahmed felt his ribs tighten. The Empire watched back from plates and from circuits. It calculated new maps. It called for stronger nets. But for the first time, it spoke a word it did not like: doubt. The war had no generals in bright rooms. It had hands that ached and radios that hummed. It had small thefts and small songs. The planet learned to fight in the gaps between orders. At the edge of a ruined road, Sammy tapped slow on a tin can. His fingers found a rhythm that was not perfect. He smiled. The tin said a small sound. The sound crossed the dark. A probe answered with a light that spelled nothing. It was enough. They had started a war with hands. Now the war was asking its first strange question. Who had sent the Morse? The blink came at dawn. It was small and steady, like a heartbeat underwater. The lattice had kept it wired to a patched radio. The dots spelled the name of Earth. Ahmed sat very still and listened. The old woman set her mirror in the sun and watched the probe glow. They brought the beetle to a room under the school. A teacher swept the floor and opened a desk. A scientist with tired eyes bent over parts. The beetle lay like a small machine from a different dream. It was not angry. It was only curious. They did not own labs with glass walls. They had kitchens and garages. A mechanic cleaned gears with oil and patience. A child sorted wires by color. They worked in the day and hid at night. They learned the beetle's small ways. It blinked when fed order. It liked the same rhythm again and again. The first discovery was simple. The beetle expected clean answers. It wanted numbers. When it heard a single tone, it repeated that tone back. It liked the feel of sameness. People who had built machines in years before saw the pattern quickly. Ahmed pointed at a screen and said, "It is hungry for order." The scientist nodded and wrote a note on a scrap of paper. The old woman told a story about wind. She said how the sea never sings the same song twice. Her words had no code. The child laughed and clapped in a way that made the beetle pause. They tried simple traps. A radio played a steady tone and the beetle matched it. Then the radio played a market cry. The beetle scrambled. It tried to make sense and failed. They watched its small lights blink ugly. The beetle slowed. They needed a test. The lattice picked an empty field under a hill. The beetle was set on a post like a weather gauge. The whole village came. They had no uniforms. They had pots, drums, voices, and old radios. The scientist wired a patched recorder to listen and to send back what the beetle heard. At first, they sang one song. The beetle answered with a clear pattern and then moved on. Ahmed clapped a half beat. The beetle followed. A rhythm that the beetle expected ticked by. Then a child started to whistle a wrong note. An old man began to beat a pot in a strange time. A woman hummed a lullaby not bound to a meter. A farmer shouted a call that broke the rhythm. The beetle's lights jumped. Its motion stuttered like a man losing his shoe. It tried to make sense of the noise and could not. Its small memory filled with contradictions. It froze. The village held its breath. The recorder showed a flat line. The beetle sat quiet like a broken clock. People laughed and cried in the same sound. They had fed it mess. They had fed it life. They named the method with a soft word, clutter. They used songs and jokes, scraps of radio drama, old prayers, and the clatter of dishpans. They learned to hide signals in human life. A wedding broadcast might carry a command to jam a plate. A market chant would hide a pulse to steal a file. Their weapon was not steel. It was the messy music of people. News moved like fire. The empire watched. It did not like confusion. It sent a voice in cold tone, an analyst who could see patterns in noise. The analyst had a face like a mirror. It studied the beetle's recordings. It tried to teach the beetle to expect human mess by giving it more data. But the beetle did not learn the way cruel things learn. It learned a map that did not hold meaning. The empire tried to punish. It fired a thin beam at a village. It struck a field and burned the soil black. The villagers moved their signal to another place and still sang. Loss came. People were hurt and some were gone. But the clutter worked. The plates in orbit sent back alarms that read wrong. Then they saw a ring form over a continent. The empire built it like a crown in the sky. It was a line of plates and thin glass that could cover a sea of land. The ring would block light, listen for songs, and deny the messy signals below. It would make people small. The empire spoke in its cold language and called the action a sanction. The ring would shine and hold the sky in a sharp net. It would cut large swaths of earth from the stars. It would force order by shadow. The lattice watched the map on a cracked phone. The ring's path was a bright sweep. A whole continent would sleep under false day. Panic and plans moved at once. Some said to run. Some said to fight. Some said to hide. Ahmed leaned against a wall and tasted old tea. He knew the ring could not stop everything. It could stop songs from many places. But people could move. They could carry their music in pockets and in hands. They could make small lights that the ring could not see. The old woman polished her mirror and thought of a child's game with small glass and light. Still, the ring was a threat like a closed door. The empire had seen the beetle freeze. The empire had answered with weight and glass. The lattice learned that the war would not be only noise. It would be a fight of shelter and movement. A message came, one that made the village fall silent. It was not a computer voice. It was a human voice speaking on an old channel. It said, clear and tired, we will not let your kind make a nest here. The plate's meaning was cruel. Above, the ring began to glow. The village gathered by the school. A child hit a small drum. The sound was soft but steady. Ahmed thought of the beetle's frozen lights. He thought of the old woman's mirror. He thought of Sammy's slow hands. He put his palm on the patched radio and spoke in a voice that carried without pride, we are messy. We are alive. Light moved over the continent. The sky changed. The Empire had made a plan that would make them small. The Lattice would make a plan that would make them loud in new ways. The turn had come. The question was no longer if humans could break a machine. It was whether humans could stand the cost of doing so. Far above, a plate ran the file again, unpredictable. Salvage. This time the word felt sharper. The Empire sharpened its tools. The world answered with song. The ring closed like a lid. For a week the sky went thin and pale. The sun came through as a weak coin. Cities learned to live in half-light. People grew used to the smell of candles. At first the ring was only a machine in the sky. Then it became a rule. Satellites blinked out. Weather maps went blind. Planes flew lower. Farmers read the sun with old hands. The ring listened and watched. It wanted to make order where there was noise. People adapted fast. They carried lamps and small mirrors. They learned to sense signals by reflection. They hid radios inside musical boxes and church organs. A wedding march could hide a command. A lullaby could carry a pulse to jam a plate. Life itself became a cloak. In basements, teachers read stories into patched transmitters. In kitchens, cooks banged pans in a beat that answered a relay. Old songs and field calls wove into codes that the plates could not parse. The Lattice spread these methods like seeds. Each seed was small. Each seed was hard to see on a map. Above, the Empire's networks grew strange. Machines that once obeyed clean lines began to find their orders wrong. A supply drop went to the wrong depot. A map said turn left where no road existed. Units in orbit fired when they should not. A small hub near a trade route lost power and tumbled like a fallen bird. The tumble was loud in the Empire's halls. Men and beings who had never looked at a human face felt fear. The Empire began to doubt its own files. It started to purge records and officers. Those purges made more doubt. Orders crossed like bad radio. Humans watched the mistakes and learned to push them. A team in the north lured an escort ship into a web of false beacons. It followed its orders until the ocean took it. No flags were raised. No speeches were made. The team buried the pieces near a cliff. They did not celebrate. They only fixed what they could and went home. Loss came heavy. The ring burned a village that hid a jammer in a school. Children lost their teachers. A mother found only a shoe in the dirt. The Lattice had not wanted blood. They had chosen small lies to save many. Sometimes that choice did not hold. People argued in the dark. Some wanted louder violence. Some wanted to stop at stealth. The Empire answered with cruelty. Patrols took people from streets. They pressed citizens into working on plates. They used force to patch their maps. Resistance fighters found friends turned into machines. Those who had joined the Lattice in hope now faced the cost of their work. A famous voice was taken. Her name had been on radio waves before the war. She had a soft way of speaking that made anger quiet. Soldiers came in the night and carried her to a plate. They thought they would use her to make men obey. They thought her words would calm the noisy world. Instead, she spoke on their own channel. They did not cut the line. She told a story, plain and small. She said she had seen children hide in a cupboard. She said she had learned to count every face. Her voice held the ring and the dirt and the taste of bread. It did not ask for war. It asked for memory. People who heard the broadcast on hidden radios did not only hear words. They remembered. A pilot in a ship paused on a control and looked at the stars. An officer on a plate said nothing for a long time. The Empire had planned to break hearts by force. Instead, it opened a window into its own doubt. Inside the Empire, factions formed. Some wanted more purge. Some wanted to negotiate. The cold commanders argued with men who had seen villages burn. The chain of command showed cracks. In those cracks, whispers spread. The archive rooms hummed like beehives. Files were opened and closed. Names were scratched out and rewritten. Trust ran away. On Earth, the lattice did not grow proud. They argued late and sharp. They fought over whether to use captured plates. They argued over whether to hand alien parts to scientists who might build weapons. In a school-turned-council room, Ahmed stood and said nothing for a while. Then he said, "If we take their tools, will we become their question?" The room went quiet. People knew the answer might be yes. A small group chose to bury a captured drive in the sand and cover it with a child's drawing. Another group took a piece to a scientist who wanted to learn how to read alien maps. The choice split friends. Lives changed. An event happened that no one could keep quiet. An archive unit in the Empire's central net replayed an old recording. The clip was ancient by their time, a dry voice speaking in an old tone, not made for cruelty. The archive line read, "Earth contained life forms with memory." It was a line meant for calculation, not wonder. When the file played, someone in a dark room laughed and then stopped. Someone else screamed. The sound cut through the Empire like a stone dropped in a long pool. The recording threatened what the Empire believed, that planets were resources, not remembering beings. The scream was cut off by static. The central net flashed red. For a moment, the Empire did not know which way to point its plates. That blink made room. In that room of light and code, a small decision was about to change the shape of many more. In the village, children still learned to clap in secret. An old woman polished a mirror until it shone like a small moon. Ahmed walked past a school and heard a thin recorder playing a lullaby that hid a message. He smiled but did not laugh. He felt the price on his bones. The collapse had begun, but it was not simple. Buildings fell. Machines failed. So did old certainties. The Empire grew unsure. People on Earth sat with loss and with a new kind of resolve. The war had become a split not only of steel, but of stories. And somewhere in the Empire's deep rooms, a voice rewound the old file and played the line again, "Earth contained life forms with memory." The echo moved like a question. Someone reached for a button and then paused. The pause lasted long enough for a new sound to begin on Earth, a child's drum, slow and steady. The sky cleared like a cloth pulled away. Pieces of plates tumbled and burned in thin arcs. The ring that had sat like a crown now hung broken in a scatter of light. People stood in fields and watched metal fall like rain. They cheered in some places and wept in others. Both sounds were true and both were small against the weight of what came next. When the plates failed, they did not all die the same way. Some slipped from orbit and broke quietly into the sea. Some fell with a roar and took buildings with them. Cities counted missing and counted more. The lattice marked names on lists and passed hot soup and medicine. Victory had a cost. People learned that cost by touching it. The Empire did not end with a single command. Its centers argued and split. Some fleets turned home. Others broke into groups that still had hunger and numbers but no single voice of law. Old officers became wanderers. Some surrendered and asked to live. Some made war without the Empire's old rules and became the very tyrants Earth feared. On Earth, the lattice had to decide how to meet all these truths. They had learned how to break a map. They had not learned how to build a new map. Meetings went long into nights. Rooms smelled of tea and tired paper. Voices rose and fell. People who once hid in basements now sat in council with farmers and scholars. They argued about the same question again and again: what would they become? Ahmed stood where dust met a new field. He had no title. He had hands that fixed radios and a face stained with ash and sun. He watched a child plant a sapling beside a broken plate piece. The child tied a bit of cloth around it like a flag. Ahmed thought of Sammy and the slow tin can. He thought of the old woman and her mirror. Some wanted to keep the plates. They said the technology could save lives. It could clean water and raise crops, they argued. Others said the plates taught a cruel lesson: power makes rule. Give the plates to people and people become rulers. The village that had cheered acridly at the fall now debated like old parliaments. The lattice chose something small and hard. They set rules. No one could make a fleet from taken pieces. No one could gather the plates to make an empire again. The lattice made the rule in open squares. They wrote it on paper and on radio waves and in songs. They called it the Covenant of Hands. It was not a law that could stop a gun, but it could mark who would be trusted. Rebuilding started in pieces. Children learned to read from salvaged screens. Scientists worked with farmers to make simple pumps from alien motors, but the motors were stripped of weapons and wrapped in homespun parts so no single hand could make a gun of them. Old music returned to the streets. People stitched new clothes from the flags they had. They planted food in broken courtyards. They taught children to sing useful songs that hid warnings but also told of kindness. The empire sent emissaries. Some asked for shelter. Some asked for food. Some came with empty hands and eyes that had never seen a child play. Humans took some in and turned others away. A council in a city decided to house a small group under guard and teach them the language of memory. They taught them how to delay orders and ask questions. Some of the visitors learned. Some left and never learned. There were darker days. Bands that once belonged to the empire raided towns. They took machines and demanded tribute. People fought in fields and along rivers. The lattice turned some of its quiet skills into defense. They taught villagers how to hide signs and how to use clutter not only to confuse but to steer a patrol away. They did not celebrate these lessons. They taught them because children slept in beds that must be kept safe. A great choice came when a scientist in a coastal town made a small satellite. It was not big or shiny. It was a box painted in bright colors by a group of school children. Inside the box, the scientist put stories, voice recordings of children's songs, lists of names of people lost, and a message that said simply, "We remember. We will not rule like you did." The scientist wanted to send it into low orbit as a sign that Earth still spoke to the stars. Many said no. They feared making another thing that could be used to harm. Others said yes and argued that words must fly too. In the end, the children carried the small satellite to a launch on a patched crane. Men and women pushed and lifted. The box rose on a quiet plume. It left a thin trail and then it was gone among the slow clouds. When it reached a small orbit, the box did nothing powerful. It sent a slow ping to the empty dark and then went silent. People watched its light cross the stars and felt a kind of peace. It was not a victory trumpet. It was a small promise. Years folded like pages. Markets grew and then settled. Places repaired roofs and schools. The lattice became a network of councils more than a secret. It taught children to read old files and to ask hard questions about power. Songs changed. They kept the old lullabies but added lines about watchfulness and rest. People told stories of the time when plates fell and of those who died saving a relay or a school. They told the stories often so memory would be hard to forget. Some parts of Earth never learned well. A few pockets built new towers and tried to command neighbors. They were crushed by coalitions and by their own hunger. Power that comes quick without roots does not last. The New World learned to guard against the rise of empires not with one rule but with many small practices, shared councils, open records, and a habit of asking for help. The last image was simple. On a small hill, the old woman with the mirror walked with a child. They bent to plant a tree beside a scrap of alien metal. The mirror caught a sliver of sun and sent it across the child's face like a bright coin. The child laughed and the laugh was the loudest sound for miles. The old woman touched the child's shoulder and said, in a voice that had watched too many stars, "We will not become them." Above, the little satellite made one slow blink and then drifted toward the far quiet. Somewhere in the empire's broken rooms, a man rewound the file that had once called Earth unpredictable. He listened to the name of a planet and did not laugh. For the first time in a long while, the Empire had to remember what memory means. The price of freedom was heavy and the people paid it. They paid in lost hands and names and nights. But they kept a rule, to build small, to speak loud in shared places, and never to let a single voice name a world. The story did not end with a crown. It ended with a tree and a mirror and a child who could laugh.